So look, we go back a little bit. We met, I think, was it about 15 years ago? But you've been in
That's right.
franchising for a long time. I love bringing on franchise pros, guys that have been through so many different transitions in the industry, have seen it all. And you are now is it the CEO of Best Life Brands?
Yep, that's right. I've been with Best Life Brands for just over 3 years, and those 35 years have colored my hair. I call that franchising gray. That's what color. That's the color I call that.
That's awesome. All right. Well, I've got the gray. My one company did that to me, did that to me. So let's back up though a little bit. So franchising for 35 years. Tell us how it all started. I want to hear a little bit about your franchise journey.
I had a little bit of a non-traditional start. Right out of college, I found a job, and it was with a company called Carey International, Carey. Not too many people know it to be a franchise business, but it's a worldwide limousine company. And I didn't really go to it with the intention of being in franchising, but after being there a couple of years, I was chasing my wife back to Pittsburgh, and she had a job in IT. She was the major breadwinner in the family. And back in 1990, you wrote letters to all the CFOs. I'm a finance guy, so I wrote a letter to all the CFOs for all the big companies in Pittsburgh. And the CFO at GNC, General Nutrition Centers, saw my letter, saw my resume, saw that I had some franchising background. GNC was just starting to franchise at that time. And thankfully, he saw my resume and introduced me to the franchising business. I was the fifth employee hired at the GNC franchising business. We had just opened our 25th franchise store at that time. There were 900 company-owned stores, and I spent 15 years there. By the time I finished there, and we'll talk about this, we had 4,000 franchise stores in 42 countries. And so it was a fantastic experience, and that was my entry into franchising way back in the late 80s, early 90s.
Wow. And franchising has changed so much. I mean, you've been through different economic cycles, obviously most recently through a pandemic, and you've been with Best Life Brands now. So again, this is another, I think, a new era in franchising. Wouldn't you agree? This new thing where these platforms are starting, more and more of these portfolio companies are happening to franchisors that are coming on the scene younger and younger, where they're becoming part of a platform. But this Best Life Brands is interesting because there's quite the success amongst these brands. So tell us a little bit about Best Life and tell us the different brands that are part of it.
Yeah, so Best Life Brands was created by the Riverside Companies, who's our private equity sponsor, our stakeholder. They formed that business back in 2017 when they acquired a company called Comfort Care. And Comfort Care has been around now for 20 years in franchising, founded by a gentleman named Mark Armstrong, who had built a network up of in-home senior care, companion care, hygiene, running errands, meal preparation, things like that. We currently have 270 territories in the U.S. and Canada. Again, been franchising for 20 years. So that was brand one. Then Riverside acquired a second brand in senior care space called Care Patrol. Care Patrol has now been around 30 years. Again, acquired from the founders, and we actually still have one of the co-founders is our brand president, Becky Bongiovanni. The Bongiovanni started Care Patrol in Arizona back in 1993, started to franchise a few years later. And what that business does is it helps caregivers and their senior parents find the best community, the safest, best community for that senior to move into once they're ready to leave home. So it's an in-home senior care service, or it's a senior care placement agency kind of business. The third brand was added in 2019 called Blue Moon Estate Sales, founded by Ken and Deb and David Blue. And the Blues started this Blue Moon Estate Sales franchise. They had about 25 locations when we acquired it. We now have 125 territories open and operating. So that's the fastest growing brand that we have today. Wonderful business, not just associated with senior care, but does a lot of senior care transition services inside that brand. And then the fourth brand, we actually started on our own. So we were the founders, and we started it. It's called Home Health. It's called Boost Home Healthcare. And here's where, people come after they had an incident. Maybe they were in for surgery or they had some kind of trauma. And so now we go in and help them with occupational therapy, physical therapy, wound therapy, infusion therapy, cancer treatment in the home. And we started this franchise. There's only a couple of franchisors in that business. And we started it. We now have 11 operating franchisees in the last year and a half or so. And we're looking to add more brands to the platform in the senior care space. And it's a fun thing to think about because it's a demographic that really needs our help. And as we continue to grow, we're learning that the services that we provide are in great need.
Oh yeah, for sure. Tell me, what is a kind of a typical best trait you look for in franchise owners, specifically, I guess, a Boost, since that's where you're starting out, right?
Yeah, I mean, for that business, it's a little bit more unique because there's a little bit of a longer run to get open and operating. So those people are a little bit more well capitalized. But generally speaking, I think most franchisors, when I was the CEO for Huntington Learning Centers, the first thing I thought when I got there, before I knew anything about the business, was all our franchisees are going to be teachers because it's after school tutoring, and that's what's going to help them to be successful. And I was completely wrong, of course. What you really need to be is good at sales and marketing, and you can hire teachers and you can hire the subject matter expertise to get into the education side of things. And I think so. Most franchisors, and you'll probably speak to your own experience from I9. I mean, most franchisors are looking for people that have a really strong skill. Hopefully, it's in sales and marketing. But if it isn't, you can enhance those weaknesses and try and support those weaknesses while you enhance their strong skills. But I think a really good sales and marketing background helps you in any business that you get started in, especially in a franchise.
Yeah, I agree. One of the mistakes I made early on as a franchisor is, truthfully, I didn't know what the ideal franchise owner looked like for my business. And you could imagine, being in sports, it was really a blessing and a curse. The blessing is that because it was sports and kids, we got a lot of interest from people that wanted to do it. The curse was it was sports, so people knew something about it. And because they knew something about it, that's ultimately what they thought the business was really about. I mean, heck, we get people that they communicated well. If they said they were well organized, they said they were detail oriented, and we liked them, and the territory was available. I'm talking way back in the beginning, we sold them a franchise. We didn't know that. We didn't have assessment surveys or like a predictive index. We didn't have a real profile. In fact, obviously the number one thing we didn't focus on was the skill of business acumen, because as you're saying, sales and marketing, because at the end of the day, home health care is the vehicle that you're using, right? Just like for us, it was kids and sports was the vehicle. But what we talked about is management, marketing, finance, operations, technology. Those are the things that we do every day. And I think that's probably one of the issues that folks have when they look to buy a franchise. They get enamored by this particular brand, not because it's a good business model, but it's something that they relate to, which again, is not a bad thing, but understanding what the business is really about. And you've signed like 7,000 franchise agreements, I believe you said. So tell me a little bit about what you've seen over the years like that.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think when I started in franchising, as I started to learn and see who the most successful franchisees were at GNC, it's not a myth where you talk about the best franchisees and people that like to follow systems. It's prescribed here. I mean, we're going to show you how to do this. Now, my mentality around that is we're going to get you 80% of the way. We want to see what that last 20% looks like. And we'll talk about innovation, because I think innovation is very important in a franchise brand. And that innovation generally doesn't come from the corporate office. It generally comes from what goes on in the field. Hopefully we'll talk about that a little bit later. But so you hear people talk about military, firemen, policemen, people with first responders. They've worked within a system. Those folks are always really good franchisees because they like to look at a manual. They want to run what that looks like. And then eventually they learn the business well enough that they can start to tweak it and understand it better. So I find that entrepreneurs are really great, and I've been around lots of them, and there have been some very successful ones. But generally speaking, it's people that really like to follow the systems, that want to have a manual and have a prescription that they can actually go execute. Those folks have been awesome to deal with and are the ones that end up being the most successful down the road.
Thank you for tuning into the Emerging Franchise Brands podcast. For additional insights, guest applications, and to stay connected, visit us at efbpodcast.com. The Emerging Franchise Brands podcast is for entertainment purposes only, and the views expressed do not necessarily represent those of Emerging Franchise Brands, its host Frank Fumey, or Emerging Franchise Group LLC. Any discussed franchise or investment opportunity requires thorough investigation, obtaining proper disclosure documents, and expert consultation before making any investment decisions. The podcast and its host do not offer professional advice or endorsements, and they hold no responsibility for actions, representations, accuracy, or consequential damages related to the podcast content.